Have you ever stood at a crossroads knowing exactly what the right thing to do was, but still felt paralyzed? Not because it was unclear, but because you knew it would cost you. The truth is, doing the right thing is rarely easy. It might lose you friends. It might make you the target of criticism, and sometimes it might leave you completely alone. But according to Stoic philosophy, that's exactly what makes it right. Marcus Aurelius once said, "Just that you do the right thing, the rest doesn't matter." That includes fear, judgment, and even failure. In this video, we're going to explore how to make the right decision, even when it hurts, even when it terrifies you, and especially when no one else will. Because the ability to act with courage in the face of consequence is the mark of true strength. If you're ready to stop hesitating and start living by principle, make sure you like this video and subscribe. This channel is for those who are done avoiding hard truths and ready to live with deeper purpose.
Number 1.
The challenge of virtue. You already know the easy road. It is smooth, crowded, and paved with the word later. Yet every Stoic text warns that the easy road is also the one on which our character quietly erodes. Epictetus, once chained yet unbroken, put it bluntly, "If you wish to improve, be content to appear foolish and stupid. Improvement costs reputation. Genuine virtue demands friction." The instant a decision begins to scrape against your comfort, you have crossed the invisible line that separates convenience from moral courage. Consider Martin Luther King Jr. in 1963, writing from a cramped jail cell in Birmingham after organizing peaceful marches against segregation. He knew the arrest would anger allies, worry his family, and feed his critics. Still, with iron calm, he reminded the clergyman who condemned him that an unjust law is no law at all. King's stand was not convenient, yet it was correct. And precisely because it was costly, it forged a legacy that still pulls history toward justice. His choice echoes the Stoic conviction that virtue must be tested to be proven. Marcus Aurelius provides the internal blueprint. Just that you do the right thing, the rest doesn't matter. Cold, heat, praise, blame. The emperor understood that consequences could bruise, but they could never wound the part of him that elected to do right. When fear of backlash rises, Stoicism prescribes a swift audit. First, isolate what is yours, intention and action, then surrender everything else, opinions, rumors, outcomes, to the current of fate. By narrowing your circle of concern, you shrink fear to a size the mind can manage. Modern life offers fresh proof of this timeless arithmetic. Think of gymnast Simone Biles withdrawing from Olympic finals to safeguard her mental and physical well-being. Sponsors grumbled, commentators judged, yet she stood her ground. In doing so, she reminded millions that excellence is measured not by medals alone, but by the integrity that refuses a victory purchased with self-betrayal. Her stand mirrors the Stoic insight that virtue is always self-consistent. It never bargains away inner harmony for outer applause. Seneca sharpens the point with his blacksmith metaphor. Difficulties strengthen the mind as labor does the body. A craftsman does not curse the heat of the forge. He welcomes it, for only fire can temper steel. Likewise, each hard decision is a personal furnace, burning away vanity, attachment, and the narcotic need for universal approval. What remains is a lighter, clearer self, one capable of carrying both triumph and defeat without staggering. But what about the loneliness that follows moral courage? Here the Stoics speak in chorus. Better to stand alone with truth than to sit in a crowd built on illusion. Cato the Younger, often the lone dissenting vote in Rome's Senate, accepted isolation as the tuition for integrity. He understood what modern psychology now confirms. A single vivid example emboldens silent observers to act. Your choice, therefore, is never solitary. It is a torch that can ignite hidden courage in others. So when the next dilemma knocks, When you must choose between pleasing the crowd or protecting your conscience, pause, breathe, ask yourself the same pre-dawn question Marcus asked before rising to rule an empire. Is this within the nature of a rational, social being? If the answer is yes, act and let consequences chase you like harmless shadows. If the answer is no, step back and let the opportunity pass. Either way, you will have practiced the art that lifts ordinary people into examples of unshakable strength. In the next section, we will dissect fear itself and reveal how a Stoic strips it of illusion, replacing anxiety with calm, precise logic. Stay with me. Mastering that inner geometry is the next milestone on your road to unwavering action.
Number 2.
Conquering fear with logic. Fear is a shapeshifter. One moment it hums as the timid question, "What if I fail?" And the next it roars as a vivid prediction of ruin. Stoicism shrinks that creature to its real size through deliberate reason. Epictetus reminds us, what upsets people is not things themselves, but their judgments about things. The first task, then, is to drag the hidden judgment into daylight and demand evidence. Until you perform that audit, fear wanders freely, inventing disasters out of thin air and calling them destiny. Marcus Aurelius offers a blunt drill. Picture the worst that can happen, describe it plainly, then ask whether virtue would still be possible inside that outcome. The answer is almost always yes. When you see that goodness survives, dread dissolves, and decisive action returns. Imagine Maya Angelou in the early 1950s, single mother, working odd jobs, unsure her voice would ever matter. Instead of surrendering to foggy dread, she followed Marcus's drill. Could she write one honest paragraph? Yes. Could she revise it tomorrow? Certainly. Could she read it to a single trusted friend? Absolutely. Advancing one rational step at a time, she shattered the fantasy that perfection must precede publication. Her memoir, I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings Later, gave voice to millions precisely because she refused to let imagined failure silence her. Shift now from literature to entrepreneurship. In 2008, Tesla was weeks from bankruptcy, and analysts predicted Elon Musk would implode. He responded with a Stoic premeditatio malorum. List every grim possibility, financial collapse, technological failure, and evaluate each calmly. Bankruptcy would sting, but it would not erase his skills. Ridicule would bruise pride, not purpose. Technology could be rebuilt. Seeing risk in proportion, he doubled down, secured funding, and emerged stronger than before. Seneca compares fear to a darkened theater. The arrival of a single candle banishes the dread. Your candle is objective description. When anxiety surges, pause and list facts like a court reporter. No adjectives, no projections, only what can be proven. The mind, stripped of speculation, stops time traveling into nightmare futures and returns to the tangible present where choices live. Stoicism does not stop at debunking exaggerated threats. It flips fear into fuel. Once logic exposes what truly matters, your character, your integrity, your capacity to adapt, fear becomes a compass pointing toward the arena where those virtues can grow. That is why psychologist Carol Dweck's research on growth mindset mirrors ancient wisdom. The person who treats mistakes as tuition inevitably surpasses the person who worships comfort. Modern MRI studies confirm the same truth. When people reframe a stressful scene as a challenge instead of a threat, the fear center in the amygdala quiets, while prefrontal circuits for planning ignite. Translation for the Stoic in you. Language reshapes biology, and a rational description can literally reroute the brain from panic to problem solving. Perhaps you are contemplating a career pivot that feels reckless. Repeat the exercise. Describe the feared scenario in precise detail. Then interrogate it. How likely is absolute failure? Even if it occurs, what resources, relationships, and lessons would still be yours? Which inner muscles would strengthen? Courage, resilience, inventiveness. By the end of this rational inventory, fear stands exposed as a dragon made of smoke. Socrates faced a death sentence with the same method. Examine, clarify, decide. We may not share his fate, but we can share his discipline. A mind trained in accurate thinking stops reacting to shadow stories and starts responding to facts. And facts, unlike fears, are rarely fatal. Carry this mantra forward. Description before reaction, logic before panic. In the next segment, we will see what happens when clear reasoning leads you into an isolated stance, standing alone for principle, and how a Stoic transforms solitude into unshakable strength.
Number 3.
Standing alone for principles. There is a moment, quiet but unmistakable, when you realize no one is standing beside you. Not because you're wrong, but because the truth you carry is heavier than most people are willing to lift. According to the Stoics, this moment is not a failure of belonging. It is the very proof of your strength, as Epictetus wrote. If you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish and stupid. When your actions come from principle rather than popularity, misunderstanding becomes a natural cost. That silence around you, it's not a punishment, it's a threshold. But how do you stay grounded when the crowd drifts away? Marcus Aurelius, a man surrounded by flattery and politics, faced this tension daily. He once reminded himself, not his advisors. You should meet adversity by doing what is right, not what is comfortable, not what is convenient, what is right. That single word, fully understood, becomes an anchor when applause fades and judgment surrounds you. It is not others who must approve. It is your conscience that must remain intact. For the Stoic, peace is not found in agreement, it is found in alignment with reason. The same fire lived centuries later in Cato the Younger, who famously stood alone in the Roman Senate, challenging the rise of authoritarian power. He knew he could not win in numbers, but he could win in integrity. He dressed plainly. He refused bribes. He voted his conscience, even when others laughed. And when offered escape, he chose principle over preservation. The Stoics do not admire him for his results. They admire him for his resistance. Cato's legacy reminds us, you don't need to conquer the world to leave a mark. You only need to refuse to betray yourself. Fast forward to the present. Think of Dr. Mona Hanna-Attisha, the pediatrician who uncovered the Flint water crisis. When she exposed the data, she faced institutional denial, media scrutiny, and professional risk. But she didn't raise her voice. She raised the facts. She didn't fight for recognition. She fought for responsibility. Her strength wasn't loud, it was rooted, and that's what Stoicism calls us to embody. A calm defiance that doesn't depend on outcome, only on principle. Seneca compared such moral clarity to walking a straight road. No matter how many people are on the wrong path, he said, it doesn't become the right one. The Stoic stands alone not to be special, but because the truth does not negotiate. If your friends mock your standards, if your colleagues pressure you to conform, pause. That moment of tension is a test. You are not being asked to prove your worth to others. You are being asked to remain loyal to the best within you. Standing alone is not glamorous. It doesn't come with applause. In fact, it often comes with whispers, doubts, even rejection. But it is also the soil where clarity takes root. Because when you are no longer distracted by approval, you can finally hear your own soul. That is the Stoic reward. Not fame, not success, but inner sovereignty. So if you find yourself in a room where everyone nods to what you know is wrong, pause. Let the silence stretch. Let your breath slow. And remember, virtue often enters quietly, without praise, and leaves behind a light others will eventually follow. You might be the only one today, but in time, your example becomes a path, because the Stoic does not seek praise. They seek peace with themselves, and peace, real peace, often begins the moment you choose to stand alone. In the next section, we'll explore how individual defiance, rooted in clarity and courage, has changed the course of history, not through armies or applause, but through a single unwavering decision to do what is right. Stay with me.
Number 4.
Historical courage and defiance. When history remembers turning points, it doesn't point to a crowd. It points to a single individual who chose to act differently. Stoicism reminds us that real change rarely starts with fanfare. It begins with someone who is willing to quietly say, no. Someone who is willing to pay the price for doing what is right. Because the path of virtue doesn't come with guarantees of comfort. It comes with the burden of conscience and the clarity to carry it. Take Harry T. Byrne, a young Tennessee legislator in 1920. At just 24 years old, he held the deciding vote on whether to ratify the 19th Amendment, granting women the right to vote. His state was split. His party expected him to vote no. But on the morning of the vote, he received a letter from his mother. Be a good boy and vote for suffrage. He thought about her words. He thought about the future. And then he broke ranks. He voted yes. With that single act of quiet courage, he shifted the course of American history. He didn't shout. He didn't demand attention. He simply did what his conscience told him was right. That is the essence of Stoicism. Doing the just thing, even if it costs you everything else. Another example, Sophie Scholl, a 21-year-old student who resisted the Nazi regime. She wasn't a soldier or a politician. She was just someone who saw evil and refused to be silent. She distributed leaflets exposing the truth, knowing full well it could lead to her death. And when she was caught, she stood in court and said, "What we said and wrote is what many people think. They just don't dare say it out loud." She didn't beg for mercy. She didn't try to justify herself. She accepted the cost. And that, Marcus Aurelius would argue, is the highest form of integrity, to live in accordance with reason, regardless of outcome. Stoicism teaches that power is not about domination. It's about dominion over your own mind. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Marcus wrote, "Realize this, and you will find strength. You may not control the world, but you can always control the quality of your response. That is your fortress." Consider the Stoic opposition in ancient Rome. Men like Thrasia and Helvidius Priscus didn't resist with weapons. They resisted with silence. When asked to flatter an emperor they knew to be unjust, they refused. No speeches, no chaos, just a refusal to betray the truth. That defiance cost them their lives, but their silence was louder than a crowd. It still speaks today. These examples aren't relics. They are signals. In every generation, someone faces the moment of decision, comply or resist, bend or remain upright. Stoicism doesn't ask you to overthrow systems. It asks you to be unmovable in what you know to be right. You don't need an audience to make a stand. You need only a commitment to your own clarity. And here's the paradox. When one person stands with unwavering calm, others take notice. They may not say anything, but inside they remember. And when their moment comes, they carry a little of your strength into their own battle. In the next section, you'll meet a man who didn't just speak his truth, he embodied it even to the point of death. He showed that it is not survival that defines you, but how you stand when survival is no longer guaranteed. Stay with me. The story of Thrasia will challenge everything you think about courage.
Number 5.
Thrasia's example, defiance versus complicity. There comes a moment when silence is no longer neutral. It becomes complicity. For the Stoics, that moment is sacred because it's the line between a life of quiet regret and a life of chosen consequence. Thrasia understood this line better than most. He didn't just study Stoic philosophy, he lived it, right up to his death. Under Emperor Nero, corruption didn't just happen in the shadows, it sat openly on the throne. Senators who disagreed were expected to flatter, or at least remain silent. But Thrasia did neither. When unjust decrees were passed, he walked out. When tyrannical power demanded endorsement, he refused to show up. It wasn't a dramatic protest. It was consistent, silent, rational disobedience. The kind that infuriates tyrants because it cannot be manipulated. Eventually, Nero had enough. Thrasia was sentenced to death, not for any violent act, but for the crime of quiet integrity. But here's where the story becomes unforgettable. As he prepared for execution, Thrasia didn't panic, he didn't beg, he didn't curse his fate. He spoke calmly with his friends. He embraced his wife, he opened his veins and died with serenity, because he had already decided that the cost of silence was greater than the cost of death. That moment, though brutal, was beautiful in Stoic terms. It was proof that a human being could live and die on their own terms, unbroken by fear. Now compare that with Seneca, another Stoic under Nero. Seneca taught virtue, wrote volumes on reason, and influenced Roman thought more than almost anyone. But when Nero began his descent into madness, Seneca stayed silent longer than he should have. He tried to retire. He wrote carefully worded letters, but he didn't walk out like Thrasia. And in the end, he too was forced to die. But his death was clouded with complexity. Many still debate whether Seneca lived up to his own teachings. The contrast is important, not to condemn Seneca, but to understand what the Stoics meant by full alignment. Thrasia wasn't perfect, but his actions and values were fused. He didn't say one thing and do another. He acted in accordance with what he believed, without excuse, even when the stakes were final. His legacy is one of wholeness. That is what Stoicism seeks. Not the illusion of goodness, but the substance of integrity. In modern terms, Thrasia's example applies to everyday decisions. When your company asks you to cover up something unethical, when your friend makes a joke that crosses a line, when your silence feels like surrender, Stoicism doesn't give you a script, it gives you a compass. It says act in line with nature, with reason, with justice, even if no one claps, even if no one follows. We live in a time when it's easier to rationalize, to explain away, to delay doing what's right. But Thrasia shows us that the time to act is when you know, not when it's safe, not when it's popular, when it's clear. Because clarity is the beginning of strength, and every moment you delay, your strength weakens. But every act of alignment, no matter how small, makes you harder to bend. In the end, Thrasia didn't just oppose a tyrant, he opposed the slow decay of self that happens when we choose comfort over clarity, and that's a lesson we need now more than ever. The Stoics didn't promise easy lives, they promised meaningful ones, and Thrasia's death wasn't a tragedy, it was a triumph of inner freedom. In the next section, we'll bridge the ancient to the personal, because all of this philosophy, all of this courage only matters if it leads us to action. If it changes how we show up in the real world, at work, in relationships, in moments where no one's watching, stay with me. Number 6, bridging theory to action, personal accountability. It's easy to admire ancient courage from a distance. It's harder to bring that same clarity into the blur of modern life. But that's where Stoicism matters most. Not in historical tales, but in how you show up at work, at home, and in the silent spaces where decisions are made without witnesses. The Stoics believe that philosophy means nothing if it doesn't translate into action, and that action, according to Epictetus, must be aligned with your role, your character, and your moment. You don't have to be a senator or a martyr to live with integrity, but you do need a code. Because when values are vague, decisions get delayed. And when your standard depends on the opinions of others, your courage becomes negotiable. That's why Marcus Aurelius wrote each morning to remind himself of who he was, what he stood for, and how he ought to act. It wasn't about ego, it was about alignment. Without that daily self-anchoring, even the wisest man can drift. Let me tell you a story, not from history, but from personal failure. Years ago, I worked for American Apparel. I saw things that made me uneasy: abuse of power, mistreatment of employees, things that I knew weren't right. But I didn't say anything. I justified my silence as not my business or not my responsibility. I told myself I needed the job, but deep down, I knew the truth. I was afraid, and I lacked the inner structure to act. Looking back, I wasn't evil. I wasn't cruel, but I was complicit. And that's what Stoicism forces you to confront. Not just whether you acted wrongly, but whether you failed to act rightly. That moment haunts me, not because I lost anything, but because I didn't live up to who I said I was, and that's the wound that takes the longest to heal. Since then, I've built something I wish I had then. A personal code, a set of non-negotiables. They're not complicated, but they are clear. Speak up when something's wrong, protect the vulnerable, refuse to trade silence for approval. This code isn't just words, it's a standard I return to every day, especially when the stakes are high. That's what the Stoics meant by living according to nature, aligning reason, responsibility, and reality. Seneca said, "To be everywhere is to be nowhere." If your principles shift depending on who you're around, then they're not principles, they're costumes. And sooner or later, the mask slips. What Stoicism teaches is this: who you are in private is who you are. And if you want to respect yourself, you need to act in a way your future self won't have to apologize for. This philosophy doesn't make decisions easier, but it makes them clearer. Because once you define your code, many choices make themselves. You no longer need to calculate the odds or poll the room. You simply ask, what does my character require of me right now? So the question is not, do you have the courage of Cato or Thrasia? The question is, do you have the courage to live by your own values today in the small places no one sees? That's the battle. That's the proving ground. And that's where a quiet life becomes a powerful one. In the next section, we'll bring it all together, because theory and history are nothing without urgency. And the truth is, this moment, right now, is the only one you're guaranteed. The question is, will you act on what you know, or wait for the world to make it easier? Stay with me. Number 7, the urgency of action. If not me, then who? If not now, then when? There's a lie we tell ourselves, and it sounds like wisdom. I'll wait until the time is right. But Stoicism has no patience for delay dressed as logic. Marcus Aurelius warned, you could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do and say and think. In other words, stop pretending you have forever. The right time is not someday, it's now. Every moment you hesitate to do what's right, you rehearse becoming someone you won't respect. That's the harsh truth. The person who hesitates doesn't just fail to act. They become defined by an action. The Stoics didn't teach urgency for the sake of productivity. They taught urgency because clarity is perishable. When you know what to do, you must move before fear talks you out of it. There's an old rabbinical saying, the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time is now. The Stoic version would be, the best moment to live with virtue was yesterday. The second best moment is this one. Because this moment is all you ever really own. Epictetus said, how long are you going to wait before you demand the best for yourself? That wasn't a motivational quote. It was a warning. Waiting is a decision. and every delay writes a story. The only question is whether that story honors you. Take Fred Rogers, yes, Mr. Rogers, as an example. He wasn't a celebrity chasing fame. He was a man who saw chaos in the world and decided to create a space of calm, kindness, and clarity for children. Every episode was a quiet act of resistance against noise, cruelty, and distraction. He didn't wait for permission. He didn't ask if the moment was right. He saw a need and moved. That's Stoicism in motion, rational, intentional, urgent. Or consider Viktor Frankl. He survived the worst of human conditions and still returned to life with a mission. To help others find meaning, he wrote Man's Search for Meaning in 9 days. He didn't wait until he healed. He didn't wait until the trauma passed. He wrote because the message was clear, and clarity demands action. The Stoic doesn't act because they feel ready. They act because they are convinced it's necessary. Here's a test. Think about the thing you've been avoiding, the conversation, the decision, the habit. Now ask yourself, am I really waiting for the right moment, or am I just scared to begin? That's where Stoicism cuts through the fog. It doesn't shame you for being afraid, but it doesn't excuse it either. It invites you to step into alignment now, not perfectly, not loudly, but fully. Because here's what happens when you wait. Your fear grows teeth, your doubts become louder, and your identity starts to mold itself around avoidance. But when you act, when you speak the truth, draw the boundary, take the first step, you reclaim authorship. That's the real reward of right action. Not applause, not success, but self-respect. So ask yourself, if not me, then who? If not now, then when? That question isn't a cliche, it's a key to escape the prison of hesitation, a key to return to who you were meant to be before fear started running the show. In the final part of this journey, we'll anchor everything we've explored into a single decision, the commitment to act, not later, not someday, but today. Because if you've made it this far, you already know what must be done. The question now is whether you'll do it. You've heard the stories, you've seen the choices, and deep down you already know what this is really about. It's not about ancient Rome, it's not about philosophy textbooks, it's about you. Right here, right now, the Stoics believe that philosophy is useless unless it shapes the way you live. And that's the final invitation. To stop thinking about the right thing and start doing it. Not perfectly, not dramatically, but with intention, clarity, and consistency, because your character isn't built in the spotlight. It's forged in private moments when no one's watching but you. So wherever you are, whatever you're facing, let this be your line in the sand. From this point forward, you don't wait for courage. You practice it. You don't seek permission, you act with purpose. And if you fall short, you begin again. That's what it means to live by the Stoic path. That's what it means to live free.